this meeting, we're going to do introductions, like I just said, and then we're going to go over the PL 566 program overview, sort of what it entails, just some basics. And then we're going to dive into the specific project, the overview, and then specific cities. Each city is going to have a chance to talk about their specific situation. And then we'll have Q&A. You guys are welcome to ask questions. So yeah, I say we get started. What do you think? I am going to do introductions. Perfect. So the lead agency for this meeting is the NRCS. On this call, I think we have both of them here. We have Derek Hamilton. He is the Water Resources Coordinator. And we also have Amy Roner, and she's the State Design Engineer. Then our project sponsor for this meeting is American Fork, and we have Rebecca Andrus with us. She's their city engineer. And then the co-sponsors include Pleasant Grove City and Lehigh City. And representing them in this meeting, we have Marty Beaumont, Aaron Wilson, and Brad Kennison. For this specific project, the team includes, oh, I'm sorry, one moment. The team includes Mr. Lane Pierce and Mr. John Sheese and Mr. Ted Mickelson. They are the engineers who are serving as the consultant project managers. They represent the sponsors. And then we have our NEPA specialists, Monique Robbins, Judy Imlay, and Jenna Jorgensen. And then, like Monique said, my name is Eleanor Chambers, and I'm handling sort of public involvement, and I'm moderating this meeting. So thank you guys so much for sending stuff in through the chat. I appreciate it. So I think we'll turn the time over to Derek. Derek, if you're here, if you could unmute yourself and talk a little bit about the PL 566 program.
On behalf of NRCS, we're excited to work with the sponsor and, work through solutions and work with the communities and the agencies there to identify even additional resource concerns that potentially this program can address. As far as the program, we'll refer to it as PL 566. That's after Public Law 83-566, and that's back from the 50s. And it's been part of NRCS and USDA's watershed programs for years. It provides financial and technical assistance to units of government during 3 phases to implement, potential watershed protection. There's approximately 2,000 plus of these watershed plans across the country. And we currently in Utah have 30 plus in the planning phase. So there's a lot of traction and momentum with this PL 566 program. Back to the funding as such, we are the lead federal action agency. We're providing the funding for this planning phase. We call it within NRCS a Plan EA. Most other agencies and groups just call it an EA. I guess why we call it a Plan EA is because we truly look at it as a large-scale planning effort, and we do not have any preferred alternatives identified. However, in many cases, we do have conceptual alternatives that have been included with the proposal and approved for funding. If this project moves forward and we can issue a decision document known as a FONSI, or of course I'm talking to agency folks, so folks know here what a FONSI means. We will then move into a design phase. And again, that's funded by NRCS at 100%, in addition to this planning phase at 100%. After that final design phase, we would move into construction. Those first 2 phases take approximately 3 years. We're looking at 18 to 24 months for the Plan EA, and then we're looking at another year for the final design. If approved and environmental clearances are all in place, construction could then take place, and then of course the funding of the project for the ultimate construction is cost shared, meaning NRCS contributes a percentage, and that's based on the authorized purpose of the project feature that's included. So again, there's a number of project um, authorized purposes associated with PL 566. Most of in Utah are flood protection or flood prevention. In that case, NRCS would cost share at 100%. Again, the second, probably most frequently used purpose here in Utah is ag water improvement or irrigation modernization type efforts. And again, that's at 75% cost share from NRCS. And then the sponsor would have to come up with 25%. Speaking of sponsors, the program requires that this is a locally led effort. NRCS is certainly involved from the federal side as far as the NEPA and some of that coordination. But we certainly want this to be led and supported by the communities and the locals. There's a few requirements that sponsors are required to have. Again, these are typically units of government that are sponsors. We're looking at local, state, federal agencies, tribal, also, water conservation districts, and then in the certain areas of the country, drainage districts. But there's a couple very important responsibilities or requirements that the program requires from a sponsor, and the one is the eminent domain. So if there's any real property rights requirements, be it fee simple, easement, right of way scenarios, all of that falls under the responsibility of the sponsor. And then of course the other one is a taxing authority, and I guess the sponsor is required for many of these projects. The lives are 50 to 100 years, so there's a commitment for O&M for many years, and the program wants to make certain that a sponsor has the ability to raise funds and continue to operate and maintain these facilities or structures that are constructed with the plan. So I think I touched on enough there, and I'll just turn it back over to other folks, and I'll be around during the Q&A session if there's anything that I need to address. So thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Derek. We're going to have Mr. Lane Pierce. He's going to start talking about the project overview, like this specific project. So go ahead, Lane.
As Derek was saying, the three sponsors, American Fork City and Pleasant Grove and Lehigh, we put in PL 566 applications, and our applications, like Derek was saying, also was for the flood prevention. The needs is the basic of our applications. NRCS has accepted our applications and funded this first phase, the Supplemental Watershed Plan EA. And as he said, with our applications, we did submit some conceptual ideas. There's a cost portion of our application that we had to submit. So we came up with conceptual ideas on how we could fix the deficiencies or concerns, but we are open to ideas. And then the three of us are teamed together as sponsors because all of our projects are located within the American Fork River watershed area. And so the next slide here is the watershed area. If you look at the blue, that's the outline of the watershed area. And our projects all take place in our cities. And you can see Lehigh, American Fork, and Pleasant Grove, each of the cities. And we have a map for each project, but they do all take place within city boundaries. They're not in the green or that area, which I know is important to some people on the phone. But we'll show you a map of where our projects take place. So I'm going to speak for American Fork. The sponsors obviously are the ones that are running this. I'm there. I've been contacted from American Fork to do the engineering. And so on behalf of the American Fork sponsor, I'll just quickly show the five locations on the American Fork River that we see flood prevention deficiencies or concerns. So here's a map. You can see location one's a culvert, location five's a culvert, box culvert, location two's a culvert, three's a culvert, or three's a channel, and 4 is a culvert. And we'll show each one here individually. We'll start with 1. This is just at the intersection of 400 North and 400 East. You can see the RCP pipe is showing a little of its age, and is an area of concern that we believe we could repair to help the river and help flood prevention, just as the 566 plan outlines. The second location, and many of these are the same type of things. They're all within American Fork River boundaries, if that's the right word. This is a culvert that goes under State Street, and we did go under there and we looked at it, and there's places that also need to repair under State Street. And so that is part of the flood prevention application we submitted also. Location 3 is an open channel, but it's a concrete lined open channel, and you can see a few places that are starting also to need a little repair and to be fixed. So it's the address is there, 100 North to 200 East, so it's in between State Street and 100 South, basically. The next location is a box culvert. You can see a couple pictures here. There's a road on top of it, and it's an area of concern, and it needs to be repaired or replaced. So prevent floods and safety for the people traveling on the road and living near the river. And the final one's the same idea. It's a box culvert that's at 100 North and 200 East. And you can see in this picture, the river is pretty full. And we just want to make sure, public safety and flood prevention, same things I've kind of hit on over and over. And like Eleanor said at the beginning, if someone has questions, feel free to raise your hand now and we can answer questions as we go. If not, I'll just turn it over to John Shees, who's going to talk about Pleasant Grove.
Hello. Thank you, Lane, and everybody else who's on the call. I appreciate that very much. My name is John Shees, and I work for Horrocks Engineers, who is a consultant for Pleasant Grove City. And we assist the city with many of their stormwater needs. Stormwater in Pleasant Grove City historically and currently drains to the northeast corner of Utah Lake. The traditional flow paths have been disrupted or restricted by development ever since settlement of the area. And many drainages continue in roughly the same location, but they only have capacity for smaller storms, and flooding is occurring during the larger storms. Pleasant Grove City would like to restore and or enhance one of the existing stormwater routes to Utah Lake. If you look on the map on the presentation there near the I-15 interchange for Pleasant Grove City, there is a crossing under I-15. It's a limited capacity crossing. It's got a maximum capacity of about 25 cubic feet per second. And this drains a whole corridor up to State Street around what's called North County Boulevard in Utah County. Currently, this capacity or this crossing then continues underneath I-15 and south and east down toward Utah Lake. With the limited capacity underneath I-15, there are flooding events that happen north of I-15. I-15 becomes a dam. And so there is flooding that happens in larger storms. If we just increase the capacity under I-15, then flooding would occur south of I-15 because the channel can't handle it all the way to Utah Lake. Therefore, the Pleasant Grove City is looking to upgrade and enhance the existing drainage system in the area to control flooding both north and south of I-15. So that is the proposed project for Pleasant Grove City. And I guess at this point, I'll turn it over to Ted Mickelson for the Lehigh project.
All right, thanks, John. And once again, as John mentioned, thank you to all the people on the phone that are willing to be stakeholders and participate with us in this project. My name is Ted Mickelson. I'm with Jones & Mill Engineering, project manager, and we're representing Lehigh City in this project. Lehigh City is impacted by the Dry Creek Channel which flows out of the watershed, which we had shown previously in the maps. And the Dry Creek channel flows through the city, generally from the upper watershed area down through the city, through developed and undeveloped areas to Utah Lake. As you can see there, that's represented by the red line. And then on the blue line is the waste ditch. And the waste ditch takes off from Dry Creek just there on the other side of I-15 and takes water out to the Jordan River. And these channels historically have been undersized, and the city's been working over years and has invested quite a bit of money in improvements in these channels to help handle the high flow flooding periods, but obviously needed some sponsor help to expedite the project to resolve some of the flooding issues. So these projects will take place on the Dry Creek and Waste Ditch. And generally, they can be probably described in three different types. One is there are some culverts that are undersized, and we'll take a look at those here in just a second. Locations. There's also some unimproved channel areas that need to be improved, and then also some improvements out through a park area. See, can you go to the next slide? So this is looking at a couple locations along the waste ditch out in Willow Park, which is part of the county area. But as you can see there in the photo on the left-hand side, that culvert is maxed out and has caused flooding historically through that section of the channel. And then the middle picture there is the channel going through Willow Park, which has also created flooding within Willow Park. So the intent here is to try and mitigate these issues with some new culverts that are sized appropriately, and also some channel improvements that will handle the floodwaters. And then the next slide. This is looking at some locations along Dry Creek in the waste ditch. This is coming through a residential area there. As you can see, this is with some unimproved channel sections. The channels have flooded, and the flooding goes into homes through this residential area, flooding houses. There's also a few culverts along this area, some street crossings that have been maxed out at capacity and have flooded as well. And then the next slide. And then this right here is Lehigh Elementary. And Lehigh Elementary also having both the Dry Creek running on the front portion of the school, and then the waste ditch running on the behind the school. As you can see, the rear of the school with the waste ditch is on the left-hand side. The waste ditch, there's a box culvert that goes underneath this playground in the schoolyard and has not been able to handle the flows, causing flooding through the playground. And as you can see on the picture on the right, that is the Dry Creek, which also has some undersized channeling through the parking area there and the bus loading area, and has caused flooding through where children have to go to get on the bus or get a ride home. And you can see they've had to create makeshift bridges to get the children safely into the bus loading zones. So kind of the general concept of this project is to address these areas along the Dry Creek and waste ditch where the channel culverts are either undersized and can't handle the capacity, or we have unimproved channel sections that also are undersized and because of not being improved create flooding hazards. And we want to address those with part of this project. And that's all we have, Eleanor, on this one. Oh, sorry, one more. This is also a location going through the residential neighborhood on Dry Creek and the waste ditch areas. You can see at capacity channels, sections that need to be improved where residents have taken some measures to try to prevent flooding. But some channel areas that are flooding and we need to address through some improvements.
Thank you to Lane, John, and Ted for that explanation of our different projects. Is there any questions before I move on, just on a brief overview of the NEPA process? If there are, you could raise your hand. There's a little button up there in the Teams message.
You can also put them in the chat. Both are good. And I can read those out.
All right, well, feel free to still do that as I go through. Just wanted to talk about the NEPA process really quickly. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the process, but where we've received federal funds from the NRCS, their process is, as Derek mentioned, the watershed plan, but then we also incorporate NEPA, which is the environmental assessment, and so that's why it's called a plan-EA. And there has been a previous study done for this watershed, which is why we have the supplemental word there as well. So this will be called the American Fork Supplemental Watershed Plan Dash Environmental Assessment, long name. But the evaluation is to document what this document will um, process the evaluation and put it into a document form. Um, let's see. As Derek also mentioned, we're in the planning phase and we are in the scoping, like pre-scoping, as has been mentioned. You know, we have some identified issues and concerns and ideas of how to fix those solutions. But during this process, if there's any additional ideas or concerns, those can be brought up and we can start to address those as well during this process. Um, we have a public comment period, which is opened right now. It opened the middle of January and will go through February 12th. So that's the time to put any comments you might have into written form, and we'll go over at the end how you can do that. Um, just wanted to go over some other factors that will be part of the NEPA process. You know, we'll be looking at engineering standards. As part of this process, with the alternatives, we actually design up to like 30%. So I think Derek had mentioned, you know, the final design takes about a year. We've already, through this process in the planning phase, we've already gotten through a lot of that design up to about 30% as part of that so that we can get costs and alternatives and everything situated. The next steps, as part of that is also an economic analysis and then organization, coordination with the government and environmental agencies, which are you folks. And some of the environmental resources that we will review are listed on this slide, which are just your typical ones that are addressed in any NEPA process. So you've got environmental justice, wildlife, water quality, lands, um, and where we're doing floods, we'll also be looking at flooding and flood protection. Um, just wanted to quickly go over what the process will look like from this stage. After the scoping process, we will develop some alternatives and look at surveys and different things that need to be done so that we can analyze the resources and analyze the alternatives as those relate to each other. And we will then be preparing, and that takes some time, you know, most of this year. And then next year, we will be preparing the draft plan EA, which is also a point of public comment, and then a decision document with the final plan EA, and then the FONSI is the final goal of this process. And it can take anywhere from 18 to 24 months just to go through all these processes. And during this time, you can expect that we will have some meetings with you folks at key milestones or coordination points. And that will probably happen maybe once a quarter, and we'll send those out through email invites as well. So again, it's important that we have your contact information. So if you haven't yet, please enter that into the chat so that we can keep track of that and have that information when we need it next. Um, and as I mentioned before, there is a public scoping meeting next week on Thursday, January 27th at 5:30, and that will be through Zoom. And I'll show you. Um, I'm going to jump down to the very bottom. If you want information on that meeting, you can find it at this website, which is franceandcivil.com, and then American Fork Plan EA. So in order to submit comments, like I mentioned, they need to be written just so they can become an official part of the process. And those would need to be submitted by February 12th, either postmarked if you're going to send it through the mail by February 12th, or you can send it through an email to this email address, afwatershedplan@francincivil.com, or there is a comment form on the study website. And so you can just go click on that, and then it'll take you to a form that you can fill out. So really very simple ways to be able to address those. And specifically what we're looking for is comments on any issues that you may have or any resource concerns that you're aware of. The other thing that we would ask is if you have any documents or studies or data or anything that you've done on other projects that could help us with this project, if you could help and submit those to us through that website as well.